I'm Amy, sex educator, somatic sex and relationship coach, and sex shop owner.
And I'm April, VP of an international high-end pleasure products company and boss queen sex toy mogul. We're best friends who make our own rules about who we are as sexual beings.
With everything from how to be a badass in the bedroom to top tips for bringing your relationship to the next level, we have something just for you.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Don't forget to head on over to our website at shamelesssex.com for more. And for 15% off of some of our favorite sex toys, use coupon code SHAMELESSPP in all caps at purepleasureshop.com. Hello, everyone. It is Amy from the Shameless Sex Podcast, and...
I have to check on that. Who am I this morning? I think last time I checked, I was Daniele Bolelli, Drunken Taoist and History on Fire podcast.
Yeah, so two podcasters here to talk about sex and a lot more, of course.
We'll just get rolling and see where we go.
Get in there. Tell me about your podcast. I'm curious. I've listened to a couple episodes, but tell me about the foundation of this. Like, what is the message?
Sure. I think what happened was... I knew nothing about podcasting back in like 2011 or so. I had zero knowledge of the field. And just by a random chance, I got a chance to be invited on Joe Rogan podcast because I'd written a book at that time. And it was kind of like a real synchronicity thing because Rogan is not exactly easy to get in touch with or get on with. And so when I got there, that was my introduction, right? I knew nothing about it. I met Redban, who was handling all the Rogan stuff beforehand. And he was like, I'm like, podcast? What are we doing exactly? Is it kind of like radio? And he was like, yeah, but you can cuss. I'm like, perfect.
Awesome.
That works. Nice. So after that, I kind of realized how big the opportunities that something like that creates, how awesome it was, the fact that we can just plug a microphone in a computer and create any content we want without needing permission from anybody. So I took about a year being a guest on various podcasts, and people were saying, oh, you should start your own. And I was like, yeah, whatever. In what time? I have zero free time. That's not going to happen. And then eventually things clicked. Rich Evers, who's not here today with us, but he immediately jumped in to help out to try to take care of the editing, take care of co-hosting, take care of all this stuff. So I was like, oh, I guess we're doing a podcast, you know? So I started out with that, but Drunken Taoist had kind of a Rogan vibe, meaning conversations about anything and everything. So it's cool in the sense that you have access to, one day we can talk about sex, one day is sports, one day is philosophy, one day is whatever we are in the mood for, whatever feels good, we jump into. History on Fire, on the other hand, is much more narrow in focus. Well, kind of. I mean, at least as a heading that's clear because it's a history podcast. So it's just research-driven. I read more books than anybody should read and then try to condense it in a way to keep it... Because most of these books are good sources of information, but they are not exactly fun to read. So my job is to take out all the little gold nuggets from it and put it together in a narrative that's people actually want to listen to. And
you make it easier for people.
Yeah. The whole point is then to make history look like, you're watching Game of Thrones and you're at the edge of your seat going, what happens next?
History can be exciting.
Exactly. That's the whole point. So those are the two that I've been playing with.
Okay.
You're clearly... have more of a History on Fire approach, meaning more of a single topic, and then you branch to other things. But how long ago did you start? What was your...
We've only had our podcast for a little over a year, and it was something that... So I have it with April, who's not here. We love you, April. We miss you. She's currently stuck in a booth selling male masturbation sleeves at a trade show, a sex toy trade show. It's a terrible life. And we've been really good friends for 12 or 13 years now. We met in a restaurant together. We were working in a restaurant. I always knew I was going to work in the sex industry, specifically open up an adult store, which I did. It's called Pure Pleasure in Santa Cruz. And we met over a conversation of her talking about being spanked the night before at a party. And I instantly knew I loved her. I was like, oh my God, I love you. And we've been super close, like soul sister status, where it's just instantly, it feels like there's something beyond us in that friendship. And if you hear us, we're also different in a way where I'm a little more calm and grounded, and she's like me on steroids. So she's just ball of energy and awesome, and she really helps to raise me up and get me like just charged. So yeah, I just like feed off of her. But the podcast was we've always known that we were going to do some sort of creative project together. had no idea what it was. Then we both started working in the sex toy industry. She's a VP of sales for a company called Hot Octopus now. So she's just a powerhouse. And we went on another podcast called Sex with Emily. She's down here. It's one of the bigger sex podcasts. And loved our dynamic on there. Just worked really well. It's like yin and yang. And just decided, and we were both single at the time too. We're like, we're single, we're empowered, let's start a podcast. Yeah. And we did. And it's been great. It's just constantly growing. It's very surprising. When I hear about the numbers to be considered some of the top podcasts, like we've surpassed those after only 6 months or something.
Sweet.
So people are liking our dynamic and what we're doing, and while it's mostly around sexuality, it's very much also around relationships and intimacy and all of that too. So there'll be more like juicy topics and more like risque stuff, and then there'll be more like, okay, so this is how you communicate with your partner lovingly, and so try to keep it really diverse and have something for everyone, and be as gender and orientation inclusive. And in my background, I'm a sex educator and I'm a sex and relationship coach, and I also own the sex shop, and I work for the lube company. I brought you guys a bottle of lube, Uber Lube. You have homework later. You will play. Yeah. The best lube ever. And so I just wear a lot of hats in the sex industry, and I love that. Obviously that's my passion.
Right.
Sexuality, specifically shame, and not that I love shame, but working with shame and all the layers and that we get over time, that really is like this armor that gets in the way of us really fully expressing ourselves as sexual beings. So I love this, like, is it de-armoring, right? Like inspiring the unraveling of the onion so that we can get into the core and figure out, like, who are we as a sexual being? Like, 'cause it's different from the next person.
Yeah, which is, I guess, you have thought about this topic probably a million times, but so what's your feeling as far as, because one can talk about religious backgrounds and Puritan stuff and all of that for why that is, but it's like, because when you think about it, it's like, why should anybody be ashamed of their sexuality? It's kind of like, it's who you are. What's the big deal? It's like, it doesn't seem like there should be, from a purely, if you look at it if you forget human history, there shouldn't be.
It doesn't make sense.
You're a happy animal. That's how it is. What do you think creates this? What do you think is at the roots of this stuff? Why, or in your experience talking to people, what is that people bring up when you kind of like dance around the topic and figure out the connection between, why is there this sense of shame attached to sexuality, at least in the experience of many people?
Yeah. So I think sexuality is the easiest thing to target and control of communities, of individuals. And also, it's when people, it's almost the easiest thing to hurt in someone, to attack and wound, and to break someone down. Yep. And so I think for a long time, and that's, part of like what religion has done too, and even outside of religion, there's just been that aspect of where people are using that as the modality to control and hurt people,
of course,
consciously and unconsciously. And so I think that's just, when it comes to religion and a lot of the things that are just these concepts and ideas and rules, and sometimes, some of us are living by those and we're not even religious, right? We don't even know we're living by them, but it's still
part of the culture, right? You absorb it without even knowing, of course.
But I think the original piece was, we need to create these rules to control people, and to make sure that they either have more babies because we want more babies, or less babies because we don't want that. And they do it in a specific way so it stays safe, or I don't even know, like survival, so diversifies the genetic code, although no one, I don't think, really makes rules for that. That's just helpful. So yeah, I think it really just comes from that, this just desire to control, and also to control that which is scary, right? Because sexually empowered people, like people are all orgasmic and it almost looks like witchcraft, right? They're like having transcendent experiences leaving their bodies, can be scary for people, and almost like we need to put that under wraps because that's a lot.
And I completely get that, and I understand. I agree 110% with what you're saying in terms of, if you want to control somebody, if you want to, what's the easiest way to break somebody's self-esteem? Definitely take something that's a huge part of the human experience, make them feel ashamed of it, and then only you have the cure. Yeah, right? It's like, you are a bad sinner, but we'll take care. You can still be okay if you follow our steps, right? Perfect. The question, though, to me is, there has to be something there to begin with, to have a vulnerability in that spot so that somebody can work on it and manipulate you.
Totally.
Because if you don't have a vulnerability, like if somebody comes to you and try to make you feel ashamed about stuff that you're totally cool with, they can try all they want. Nothing's gonna stick.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like telling you are tall, that's a bad thing. It's like, what are you talking about? You know, it's not gonna bother you.
Yeah.
It's not. So for somebody to be able to get under your skin and to get to work on your insecurities, that means that those insecurities have to be there to begin with, and then these people exploit them.
Yeah.
I guess that's part 2 of my question is, where do those insecurities come from before people start laying a whole shame baggage to attach with the religious ideology and other things?
Well, so I always like to use the example of looking at little 2-year-olds, right? And they're little pleasure seekers. All they want to do is what feels good. This feels good. I'm going to rub it on my genitals. This feels good. I'm putting it in my mouth. And anything that doesn't feel good, they don't want it. It's like the ultimate tantric living, right? They're all present in the moment and they're just using the body's senses for yumminess. And if it's not yummy, they don't want it. And then society gives them all the shoulds and should nots, all the rules. So I don't think that someone has to already have like that. I feel like that's the original piece of where the insecurities and things come in. When someone says, hey, just so you know, but when you do that, you're not normal. When you do that, you won't be loved. When you do that, you're in trouble, you're bad. Whereas I feel like before that, unless they have like trauma from being in the womb, because that does happen, or trauma from being an infant, that happens too. But otherwise, if they had like the most clean, they're the cleanest fetus and the fetus and cleanest baby born. It's that time when they figure out, okay, I live in society and people are telling me I have to be a certain way. So I need to turn down or turn up certain parts of myself. And then that's internalized. And I honestly don't think it's avoidable. And again, I don't think it has to be necessary. And of course, it can be. If someone already has things like some trauma, then it's much easier for them to internalize the shame and trauma. But I think it's really just those messages, because deep down, everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be in community and be accepted. But if the message is, if you do this or don't do this, you're not loved or accepted, people start to conform.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's just that. It's just, and it's constantly coming at us in so many ways.
So in that sense, it may not even be specific to sex at all. It may be insecurities in general, because they are just life, interactions with other people, the fact that you have to kind of sometimes limit yourself for the sake of living in a tight-knit group with other people, and that kind of game starting, at least in some people, creating insecurities that then you can narrow in on sexuality, and that will transfer on to that.
And sex, again, is, when you think of sex, especially if you think of like penetrative sex, right? It's like the most vulnerable, connected, and sometimes disconnected while there's still bodies connected thing, and that one of the most vulnerable things that two bodies can or more can share together. As a receiver, someone or something is inside of you. How many other ways do you get to experience that? And so it just makes it an extra loaded topic and experience in terms of the way that we experience it and think about it. I mean, I honestly think like the receiving bodies, vulva owners, it's the vulnerability, I think, is even up a notch for them and of course there are receivers who are not vulva owners too. So, but it's just, someone or something is inside my body.
Right.
Because that never happens otherwise, unless I'm personally doing that with, an object or putting food in my mouth. But otherwise, it's just, it's really an intense experience. And not everyone thinks of it that way. I remember when I was younger and I hadn't had sex yet, and I was already had the kind of more open mind, and I was like, virginity, I hear these stories about it being a special thing and a gift. I don't think it needs to be that. And then I ended up having my first sexual experience with someone that was a childhood best friend, which was great in that sense, except they broke up with me a week later, so that was kind of traumatic.
Bad timing.
Yes. And what I will say is, after having that experience, I really do think it doesn't need to be looked at as this like special gift, because it probably isn't going to be that. It's probably not going to be a perfectly wonderful experience. And I do think that there's a deep vulnerability there that is being shared that I wish I had valued more in my first experience. And And yeah, it's how much more. I mean, there's other ways we can be vulnerable. We can be vulnerable without even touching, and when we add touch to it, it's just changes things.
What do you mean when you say, I wish I had been more aware of it?
I wished that I wish that I went in it with more empowerment, with less of this. I was a little dismissive of it being some sort of just like, this is not a big deal, because it actually was pretty traumatic to have someone that I shared this very vulnerable experience with a week later say, I don't want to see you anymore. Yeah. And then, it comes with these abandonment things. And it, of course, is somehow related to sexuality because of how that happened. And so I wish that how I had gone about it was just holding it with a little more reverence. Again, not like this special gift like that, like the church says.
I got it.
Yeah, but just like it is a little sacredness to it.
But it's tricky though, because I agree, right? I get it. But at the same time that a sense of empowerment comes from experience.
Of course.
And now you get this, it's like the catch-22, right? When you apply for a job that is like, you need to have the experience in order to apply. And it's like, how do I get there? Because in order to have the experience, I need you to say yes. It's like,
you can't just create it.
It's like, in that scenario, you get the empowerment from becoming confident and comfortable with the experience. But of course, how do you get the experience to begin with without the trauma and the difficulty?
Well, the knowledge is a part of it too. But what you're saying is more of the experiential practice of it is, of course, much more beneficial. And that's that trial and error piece. But to go into it with more knowledge, I was raised in a very open household where my mom told me, 2 years before I was even sexually active, she's like, when you want to get on birth control, just come to me. And so I knew that sex wasn't shameful, but there weren't a lot of conversations around pleasure.
Sure.
And I think that's common for everyone, all genders. And I think especially for women, we live in a very penis-centric culture. It's interesting. A lot of the clients I work with, it is so common for women to think it's more important, male pleasure is more important, that sex is actually for them. This is still happening. Young people and people who are 20 and people who are 30.
Seriously?
Yeah, baffles me.
Wow.
And I think that this is more common than not. But this is again because there's no conversations around that. So the empowerment could come from if that were there, if that were on the table when someone was 10 years old and said, pleasure between two bodies is a mutual experience. Like both bodies are capable of it, and I don't want to say necessarily entitled, but it's mutual.
Totally, of course.
And there's no hierarchy there, and so I'm just constantly blown away, and it's actually really frustrating to me. I get kind of angry sometimes, and like, really, we're still thinking this. Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, that is trippy. But the scenario you described, I think, is actually very typical because, most of the time you're going to have people who are, you have heard about it 72,000 times, so you have built it up in your head a lot. And then, the experience, like if I tell you, whatever, this movie is going to be the greatest movie you've ever seen, and I tell you that for like 3 years in a row and you finally watch it, doesn't matter what movie it is, you're going to watch it and go like, it's okay.
Yeah, great.
It's like, because you just build it up too much. It's kind of like something like sex, forget it. It's going to be, of course, there's this idea, in fact, of like first time being not going to be. And accept it that it's not going to be.
It's going to probably be awkward.
Yeah, it's like, be cool with the fact that it's not going to be. Probably not the second or third or fourth or fifth.
Or maybe for 10 years.
Right. But by time number 37, maybe you are good.
Maybe you start.
Exactly. But it's like, I think that's also part of it that's why I completely get what you're saying. I agree. There is, you don't want to be dismissive for sure and consider it like, oh, not a big deal. No, it is a big deal, of course. But at the same time, the more you make it a big deal, the more people will be hyped up in their head, and it's going to be like the potential for things to go south get even more,
Well, and that's the piece with taboos too. The more you make something, don't do this is not a good thing, the more a lot of people want it too. They're more likely to do it, right? So, and that's the case for so many aspects of sexuality. It just heightens it. There's the part of like, we habituate to things, and it makes it so we get more used to something. And then the other side is like, the more you pull something away and take it off the table, like, oh, I need that now. Yeah. I'm going to try that. And it makes it extra hot. And you can put that as like spank bank material. So. Right. Yeah. What about, so you grew up in Italy. So how has sex approached there? Like, what is the general feeling, I guess, compared to American culture?
I mean, one thing that's different, not specific to sex, but about just touching and physicality, there's a lot more of that for sure. So there isn't just the, you never touch each other and then there's sex. It's a lot more of a physical culture. People greet each other, kissing each other on the cheek. There's people hug each other all the time. Men, I was always kind of freaked out when I came to US that I would see guys hugging each other because there would be these like harm in between, clasping hands, let's create some distance with our bodies, and then 3 pats on the back. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? That's not even a hug. It's like either give me a hug or don't give me a hug.
It's like a handshake with the body.
Yeah, that's just bullshit. That just looks silly, And I was like, oh, there are some weird things that are different on a cultural level, But so that part I like a lot about Italian culture, the physicality of it, the fact that there's a lot of it. In terms of sex specifically, I don't think it's necessarily like the attitude about it is that much better than in US.
Okay.
It seems fairly similar in terms of there definitely is this sense of like a lot of emphasis on kind of guys being sort of aggressive in their I want it now. There's a ton of like, even if you like, for me as a guy hanging out with women friends on the street, man, you can never relax, and you can only imagine what it is like for the woman, because there's always somebody talking to them and being aggressively flirting, which is not flirting, you're just being an asshole kind of thing. And, things like that where you're like, Jesus Christ, man, I understand you like her, relax a little and don't be a dick about it, and instead there's a lot of that in Italy for sure. There's a lot of that in a bunch of places, it's like, but in that sense, Italy is no different. There is, even though, technically Italy is a super Catholic country, in reality it's not, because the vast majority of people could not care less, Maybe they say, like, years later you find out they check the Catholic box, but I'm like, you've never gone to church in the last 10 years. Nothing in your life has anything to do with it. How are you? So even though you read the statistics that is like 90% Catholic, the reality is not like that at all, right? However, as you were saying earlier, some of those ideas pervade the culture. So you can never go to church, you can never have it as part of your daily life, you may never... But still, some of those concepts are still around, which is why I think a discussion like what you're having about the concept of shame, I think is something that people really they suck it up with the culture. It's something that gets ingrained in them from very early on, and they may not even know where it comes from. And again, it may not be strictly religious education. It may be the TV shows you watch or the vibe you get from, you kind of get the message from 10,000 different sources. And so it becomes almost natural, even though it's not natural at all. It's clearly a conditioning of your culture. And I think that's why I think it was Chris Ryan who calls it the shame exorcist.
Yes,
that's awesome.
I love that.
Beautiful concept, right? Because I agree with you completely that that's the one thing in terms of personal self-esteem, that if you clear that out, oh man, it's like everything else becomes easier. You know? But that kind of stuff is so heavy for so many people, and they carry it all their life. Make it 10 times easier to manipulate them because they have this deep-seated insecurity about something that's so basic about their life. They are going to be... Like, I look at it politically. Like, right now, I see kind of the rise of dictators around the world. There's, like, dictatorial figure who have this charismatic, I'm the strong man, I'll take care of business. To me, it's like, if you're confident, you never listen to an asshole like that. Because it's like their act is so obvious. It's so clear that they are playing on your insecurities and your fears that if you don't have them, that guy looks just like a clown. It's like, come on, why would you listen to him? But the fact is so many people have those insecurities. And because objectively it's hard to get rid of them once they have been instilled in you for so long, that then I see it applying even to politics. I see it apply to so many other things. Because ultimately it's about insecurities, which are a basic human thing. It's just at the roots of our psychology. So I find that it applies to a lot of things, not just to one aspect. It's your whole life is affected by this stuff.
Well, and shame also is a teacher, right? Like, without shame, then we don't know what the freedom is. What's on the other side of that. So it's not to say, I don't think anyone will ever be completely clear of shame. And it's not something, I don't know that I love that Chris Ryan's a shame exorcist.
Yeah.
He's not a sex exorcist. Yeah.
No,
Well,
that would be weird.
Maybe he might be. I don't know. And there's the part of seeing that, okay, this is the experience that I had. It's part of my story. I'm not attaching to the story. I'm doing the work so that it doesn't feel like this weight on my shoulders. And what did it teach me? I need these experiences, and maybe not the most traumatic ones, but I need to experience a little bit of shame and a little bit of that challenge of being, so that I can really learn more about who I really am. It's all part of the ego game of a deeper understanding of who I really am, and of course, I'll never know what that is, but. So there's the beauty of shame. There's a little bit of that, and as little shame as possible, the better. That's
of course.
Yeah, that's the way. So
no, definitely, because in that sense it's funny too. I notice it in so many aspects. Like for example, for me doing the history podcast, I teach history in college. I've been doing it, that field for a long time, and sometimes it's puzzling because I read so many history texts. And they talk about war 72% of the time. They talk about, it's all these some of the key aspects of what makes life fun. Take something like sex. It's hardly ever discussed.
Yeah.
Barely. The last few years, kind of, maybe the last 30 years or so, you see that happening slightly more. Slightly being the key word. Most of the time, they have the discussion of entire society's history, culture, everything, and never mention sex.
Yeah.
And you're like,
hello. Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that's think about how many people over a 50-year period in any given society are going to end up in war? Not that many. Yeah, traumatic experience, yes, a big deal. But in terms of how many minutes you spend in your life in those 50 years, it's not that much. How many are going... for how many people sex is going to be a huge part of their day-to-day life? Pretty much everybody. And you don't talk about that, yeah. Right? That's not a topic, whereas something like the big battle is the topic. It's like, that's just weird.
Yeah.
That just seems bizarre to me.
I love learning about, in different cultures and different times, and what was sexuality then, and how watching how that's changed over time. And of course, we don't necessarily know everything about how it was 2,000 years ago. Sure. And just even listening to the different ideas of what that is, because it's just a constant reminder that it's all contextual, it's all based on time and location, and I love that. I love the reminder that it's always changing, and it's different everywhere, and it's different per time. And yet people get so stuck in thinking that their time and their way is the way, has always been the way, and is what everything should be. I think it's more common than not, that belief, and it's so limiting. It's just, people just get stuck. And when I talk about things like this, that there's different ways, and it was different 100 years ago. It's going to be different in 100 years, and it's different in the next country, and in the next city. People, their system almost can't really digest that. Not everyone, but I think that is common for people. It doesn't settle well. My experience is the experience. And of course, that's what leads to a lot of things like homophobia and all of that. I don't understand it. It's not my experience, so it must not be right. And it's, that was another thing that really bumped me out too.
No, and I think it's, even when people pay lip service to it, like, oh yeah, of course, this is not, I don't take this for granted. I understand that people are, it's like, no, you really don't. It's like, of course, you're a product of your culture, and it's really hard to try to step out of it. But which I think is one of the things that I find fascinating about history. Putting myself, for me, is an imagination game. It's like, what would it be like to be in that situation, in that place, living through that person's, like, what would the world look like through that person's eyes? What would their day-to-day experience be like? What would be, because ultimately, we got the same biology. That hasn't changed. So the basic things of life are going to be the same in all cultures. But how we interpret them is going to be very different. How you go about it is going to be very different. So you're going to have the same impulses, but how you act on them changes completely from place to place, from time to time. And sometimes people tell me, they think I'm joking, because sometimes when, a few times when people are asking, oh, what got you into history? I have my polite, don't know the people kind of answer. Then I have my more real answer that to me was great masturbation material, because it's like the fantasy of it all, of like what you create with the fantasy of being makes it 10 times more mentally exciting because you're creating a story, right? You're creating this image, you're creating, so there's a whole other side to it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like, quick, pass me the history book, get me, because it's fun, right? And people think, oh, haha, funny joke. I'm like, no, actually, literally, that's what I mean, and I think that to me is that's why history wasn't even my major, right? I did something else, and then I kind of stumbled on it, realizing that that's what throughout my life I've been interested. Like as a kid, I was reading history books that were like tailored for kids with the drawing and the stuff and the images, and that was awesome because I would be like, I see this image. What's like to be this character in the story doing this and that? Who would I be into? If I'm attracted to this one, how would I go about it? What would I... That to me is what brought history to life, rather than being, who's king in 637, which is like, who cares? You can be the most accurate history in the world, but it's really not that interesting to me as a human being. That game is fun. It's immersive. It's your whole persona getting into not just who won what war, which again, not really that relevant or important. So that part to me is where the whole thing gets juicy. It gets fun.
Do you think that, okay, so as someone who you have a lot of experience in reading history and getting into the story aspect, getting really involved in it, do you think that has, and you made the great masturbation material comment, do you think that practice of that makes it so that you are able to go into more elaborate fantasies easier compared to the average person who doesn't have that? So,
totally.
Yeah, so you could just go drift off like, ooh, I have endless amounts of spank bank material. It's not just one limited scene.
Exactly, which makes it
that's exciting.
So much more fun.
That's fun. You probably have all kinds of elaborate, sexy Game of Thrones things going on.
Of course, exactly. It's that's what it is, right? And to me, it's like it applies. I mean, of course, it applies to sex, but it applies to everything else as well, right? It's imagination. It's essentially weight training for your imagination that you're doing. That's what to me history was all my life. It was never an academic, study this narrow topic about the socioeconomics of. It's like, yeah, that's great, good information to have, but I'm interested. It really becomes an imagination exercise and even an empathy exercise because you're trying to put yourself into the head of somebody else. And playing that game, of course, great masturbation material because your fantasies get wildly elaborate.
You can do anything,
and they get really vivid, which is what makes it 10 times more exciting and more fun compared to just purely the act of masturbation. Okay, that feels good, whatever.
Just rubbing one out.
Right, but the act plus everything else, like the act is almost the last part of the game. It's like it's everything else that you built around it that's fun. That makes it exciting.
It's interesting because I always thought that I know folks that fantasy is really hard for them, and I always just thought it was more like a shame block. It's just scary to go in there. They don't, but there's also this other component that you're saying here that I really like. It's a practice, and I think of when we're kids, my imagination was so wild. I was a kid. I had rape fantasies when I was 10, and I don't have specific sexual trauma related to that. And I think I saw a scene on I think it was like Melrose Place or something, and I was a little 10-year-old.
Very mild stuff. Too,
very mild, softcore. It was turned on by this, and my imagination would run wild. And then as an adult, it became harder to access that part of my imagination. It's almost like, a rusty wheel just trying to crank it. Sure. And so I like that. Not only is it the shame pieces, but also there's just like the practice of it. And the more that you actually practice using your imagination creatively, the better the spank bank material.
Exactly. It applies to everything else as well as that, of course, because it's storytelling, right? If you ask a bunch, most kids can tell some kind of stories, but the ones who work on it, they become awesome storytellers and they come up with a great story at the drop of a dime, right? As you do it less and less as you grow up, unless you keep up with it, it's like it's a muscle. It's like anything else. It starts atrophying. It's not going to be there that much. So if you ask the average person to come up with some cool, great story, they would have no idea how to do it because they just never do it in their life. So if you don't have an imagination and a fantasy when it comes to storytelling in general, of course you're not going to have it in that aspect of your life either. Yeah. It's going to be very just meat and potato, very black and white kind of thing. There's not. So to me, it's a storytelling game. It's an imagination game. And like anything else, if you don't practice it, you're not going to have it. And it's not, just a gift from the sky that either you have it or you don't. Is you put in the time and you quickly see the rewards.
There it is.
Everything gets more vivid and intense.
Do you have any specific fantasies you're working with right now?
They are all very most of the tales are kind of like, they are sort of the classic tales that I dig in all the stories that I love, right? A lot of my images, most of the story that I like is never contemporary stuff, is never recent stuff. I don't care that much for it. I like to sort of go back in time. In the weirder the context, the better. From like tribal life as hunters and gatherers 10,000 years ago. Awesome.
Everyone
Nature
sharing
all around
partners
you.
and
Right.
Yeah.
There's the or like you read, for example, you read certain things like in anthropology. You read about in a bunch of tribal culture how people are sometimes from different tribes. They have a friendly relation. They trade with each other. So and so goes to the other village to trade, and these customary, and again, I'm not generalizing about all tribal cultures, because that's not the case, but in some culture, there is this thing of like, they go there, and some person of the opposite sex from the other tribe will just come in and sleep with you. They may be in a relationship, they may be parents, they may be whatever, but it's kind of like, hospitality.
Yeah.
It's our good friend from the other
This
one.
is how we welcome.
Here is some food, and let's go have sex. And it's kind of like, which of course to the modern mind in US today sound like, what?
Yeah.
What are you saying? It's like something like that. To me, is both hilarious and exciting.
Yeah.
From a cultural standpoint, it's hilarious because you go like, wait, time out. What just happened there? But from a fantasy scenario, it's like, oh, that's awesome. I think that's a perfect fantasy. I'll go with that.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
So things like that you run into in the reading you run into, and you start seeing these things that are different enough, that are wild, and yet recognizable enough that you can relate to. They are not going into some really weird thing where you're like, okay, that I don't find that exciting. That's just weird. You guys are scary, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's just something that like, okay, I can see that. It's not my experience, but I can stretch my mind going there.
I feel like I need some new Spank Bank material, because I think I use like the same exact scene and it's over and over. It's like this very specific thing that's happening, and like position and everything, and it's literally only like 10 seconds worth of material that I'm
stretched for
years.
Just
like replaying over and over again, and it totally works for me. And so when I'm sitting down for some self pleasure, I'm like, okay, what am I going to use today? I'm like, one replay over and over again, and it continues to work. And I understand that humans love newness, and so I'm having great orgasms with that Spank Bank material, and I bet I could have even more powerful ones with something super juicy and new. And it just takes me creating that. It takes work.
I think that should be a thing for your listeners. That should be, throw it out there. Everybody should start sending out or post them somewhere or something their top 3 fantasies.
Yeah, just share.
What are the images?
Yeah, so we can borrow each other's.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's like, hey, I like that one. Yeah. That's not a bad one.
I'm going to try it on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just try it on. Oh, okay, not my thing. Try this other one. Ooh, that's really hot.
Exactly.
I like that. All right, everyone. So if you want to send us your fantasies, please do.
Get your homework done. That's
just help inspire other people. And that's really part of it, is we're stuck in our own process. And a lot of it's, what we've experienced, but then we hear something else that's just like, unfathomable, but still you feel something in your genitals when you hear it, and it just takes that exploration. Right. But people aren't having those conversations. Like, we're talking about it now,
right?
But it's not very common for people to be like, "Hey, friend, so what are your fantasies?" It's interesting. Okay, I'd like to ask this to you. So, do you talk about sex with your friends often? Is this a regular thing you do? Okay, okay, great. And I feel, and I do obviously with my friends, and part of that is, I inspire that, obviously, but everything from the really hard stuff to the really great stuff, and it's just like the same conversation as "How are you?" would be like, "So what's new in your sex life?" And that's where the nuggets come in. That's like the gold is of inspiration, feeling heard, feeling like, oh, I'm not alone, and all of that too. But people are just avoiding those conversations often.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that shame idea. It's like,
we're not supposed to talk about it. Don't talk about it.
And it's like, to me, it's very... I mean, I understand that. It's not that that concept is foreign to me, because like, we all grow up with that stuff all around us, right? So the process of getting rid of it is a process. It takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. But like, to me, somebody asked me now is like, why should you ever avoid a topic? Why should it be a topic that is like, we don't talk about that? Shush. It's like, man, are we still stuck in that? I mean, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so I kind of have fun with it, because to me is I bring it up in context where probably people shouldn't bring it up, and they ask me about it. And exactly, it's like, why did you get into history? Oh, it's great for masturbation. Like, what?
What does that mean? Yeah.
What?
I'm going to read more
It's
history
like-
books now.
Right, exactly. It's the... So yeah, one of my all-time idols, for example, speaking of history, is this guy from the 1400s, was Japanese Zen monk, which doesn't sound like the most sexually driven point to start with. But he was hilarious. Savannah did this amazing illustration of it. I'll show it to you later. Ikkyu Sojun. He was the illegitimate son of the Emperor of Japan. His mom, to avoid having him getting killed in some palace conspiracy, put him in a Zen monastery when he was 5 years old, saying, hey, he's going to be a monk. He doesn't want anything to do with the title, emperor, nothing. Just please don't kill him. Thanks. He grows up in it, and he's incredibly bright, so his grasp of Zen Buddhism is super good. And precisely because it's super good, he can't stand the establishment of what Zen Buddhism has become. He's really turned off by them. And the three things that are the most important in his life, where all of his writings, all of his vibe is about, are Zen, sex, and booze. He really likes to drink, he really likes women, and he's Zen. And he even has this thing, like when he's an old guy, at one point they say, he gathers some of the people who are following him, and they're like, after I'm gonna be dead, I know some of you are gonna take to the mountains and meditate. Some of you are going to just have lots of sex with lots of women. Both types of Zen are good with me. But if you become a professional cleric and start blabbing about Zen as the way, then you're my enemy.
Oh,
and I thought it was genius,
yeah,
right?
I love that.
There's this thing that his whole approach is refusing that distinction between the sacred and the profane.
And it's inclusivity too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's not.
It's life.
There's
life.
not just one way. Yeah, and that the profane is sacred and the sacred is profane. It's
Precisely. I mean, if you do it in a way that, if you're not an asshole about it, if you're not abusive, because you always hear stories about what people preach and what people do being two different things. Whereas in my mind, instead, if you actually lived up to your ideals, if you actually were honest with yourself first and foremost, it's the classic story. What was it? That guy, Ted Haggard, whatever the name, the head of like this evangelical organization. The evils of masturbation, the evils of homosexuality, busted doing crystal meth with a gay hooker, which is like, come on, man. It's like, maybe you didn't have to go that far.
Yeah.
Maybe you could have just been a little more open and you could have lived up to it and you didn't have this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. You could have
fighting what's really inside.
Exactly. It's like, because then when you repress it, then it merges in unhealthy ways. Again, to each their own, but just hearing about it, crystal meth with a gay hooker does not sound like the healthiest approach possible. It's like, I've heard better ways to express your sexuality. And so to me, it's like, that's what I dig about Ikkyu. The fact that he's completely unashamed in, this is who I am. I'm not going to be an asshole about it. I'm going to be nice to the people that I want to have sex with. But it's also just sex. It's where it's at.
Exactly.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's so refreshing. It shouldn't be, right? It should be normal. But because we're so conditioned to very different models, seeing somebody like that is like, breath of fresh air.
It is. It really is.
Like, So Sav did this painting, I'll show you later, where there's a naked lady pouring wine that's falling off her body, and there's Ikkyu just drinking the wine that's falling off her boob. It's
I've never seen sexuality and Zen in the same, so I'm really intrigued by that.
And there is there's a lot of Zen Buddhism that's very anti-sex. That's very
rigid, very
completely
rigid,
puritanical and rigid and weird. So it's not even Zen; it's him. It's this guy. It's his approach, and I think the more role models I can find historically and in contemporary society of that, the easier it is to then, because like anything else that you want to be, you need to have some kind of model that then you copy, right? That you're like, oh, that gives me an insight of, oh, this feels right. But if you just feel it and you don't have a model of people actually behaving that way, it's kind of hard to manifest because you're just sort of groping in the dark trying to find your way. Whereas in this way, it's like, oh, I like that. I don't want to copy it exactly. I'm not that guy, but he gives me good ideas. He gives me a good sense of, he lays out a map for how to be that way, So anytime I can find, I want at some point do a history on fire on EQ, because so much of history is battles and wars and this
bring
and
in the
that.
sex.
But exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I want to do an EQ one. It's going to be tricky because
your listeners are going to love that.
Yeah, that should be juicy.
I want to, I want to talk about sex work a little bit, and I want to know your opinion. So I've always heard of it as the oldest profession in the world. As a historian, do you agree with that?
Well, clearly it must be the second oldest profession, because somebody else must have some other resources to trade for it.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. There you go.
You
Yeah,
need
you
to
have to have something to give. Otherwise,
right.
it wouldn't be work. You'd just be having sex for
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's to be, probably the second
One of the
oldest
oldest,
profession.
right? Yeah.
But I think it's also a lot of it depends on how you characterize it, because in some cases there's like there are cultures where there are, that's not sex work, that's just somebody with, for example, a woman with lots of boyfriends, and they just happen to give lots of gifts, and there's that part of, so it's not necessarily seen that way, even though from an outside, like from our society, maybe seen that way, it's not necessarily. And I think to me is, I guess, going back to your first time sex type of idea, as a guy, that's what I imagine as my ideal scenario to be, would have been 13-year-old, 14-year-old, you're introduced to your hooker teacher, who's sweet, who's nice, but it's not, you're not in love, it's just somebody that you click with, that you like, that you're attracted to. And they show you the ropes and make you comfortable and help you become really more comfortable with yourself, with your sexuality, with everything else. And then it's kind of like, if you want to learn how to drive, you need to learn how to drive. If you want to learn anything else, it's like, why is sex any different? Why is it not something that is like you do in a context that is relaxed, is pleasant, is not weird, but it's not about, to me, I think one thing that I dig about the concept of sex work is separating sex from love, right? Which sound to many people is like, just if you say that, it sounds horrible. It's like, what do you mean you separate sex from love? It's all about that. Otherwise, what's the point? And I'm like,
pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
connection.
Yeah, the fact that you can then love somebody, that's great, and you mix it with sex, that's perfect. But it doesn't have to be.
No, some of the best sex is not in love. It's new and it's exciting and. There's no strings attached, totally.
And I think we are raised in such a way that that's not okay, that's not the way how it's supposed, that somehow, and that's one thing that comes up with sex work a lot, is like that it's disrespectful, that you're treating somebody like an object. There's this idea, right? That, and I'm like, no, you're not treating somebody like an object, you're sexually attracted to, and you're nice to each other. That to me is the key point, is you're totally nice to each other. It doesn't have to be a weird thing, but also, let's be real about it. It's about sex. It's not about we're going to share our life together. It's I find you hot, you do the same, great.
Let's play.
Fun.
Yeah.
Exactly. And for the time we share, we can be ridiculously sweet to each other. But there's a clear expiration date there, right? We're not making plans for 10 years from now. It's just here and now, and that's where it's at.
I love this idea of, that's like sex ed 2.0. Like, it's not just in the mind and all heady, like, okay, here's what you do and what you don't do. It's actually like, okay, now let's practice. And let's practice with a professional who is well-trained in whatever it is that you're in. And let's find out what you're into individually.
Yes.
What types of bodies are you into? What kind of play sounds good? Okay, let's go practice. No strings attached, really safe, and learn about consent here. That would be awesome. I'm sure there's some people listening like, oh my God, the children, the children, because of course that person, if you're talking about, because people are starting to be sexually active at young, and they have had, and people think it's newer. They're like, oh my God, as time goes on, people have sex younger and younger. Like, no. It's been going on for a long time. Still going on all over the world. People having sex very much younger than American culture. And if those people were able to learn from someone that was obviously a little older, which is just like so taboo, but you get rid of some of the air and you'd really help them, like that confidence piece too.
And I understand it's a very delicate balance because, of course, the potential for abuse of that scenario is humongous.
Of course.
Right? The potential,
and it will never go perfectly. Yeah.
Completely.
Nothing does.
So the odds are, if you were to create a system like that, there will be some people would benefit tremendously and it would help their life a lot, and other people would end up in some weird dynamic that really freak them out and traumatize them. So it's not to say that this would be the perfect thing for everybody. It's not.
Of course. Yeah.
There's definitely potential for things to go wrong. There's all of that. But And never mind the fact that, when you think about your sex ed courses or even your high school teachers, it's like the idea of them sexually is like, not that.
Yeah, don't touch me.
Definitely not that.
Yeah. No, thank you.
So it needs to be, if you are going to have something like that, it needs to be very much driven from the one person who technically has less power. The one who's younger and they have to make the choices. They need to pick. They need to... It needs to be their thing. They need to be comfortable, not somebody else kind of pushing it on them. Bad idea, But if it's the other way, again, I'm not talking for anybody else because I don't know their experience and it's hard to imagine all the cases. But for me, 13, 14, holy hell, that would have made my life so much better.
Me too. Oh my gosh.
And years of struggling, stress, weirdness, shame stuff. And instead, you get that out of the way earlier.
Yeah.
Life would be so much better.
Do you know of any cultures that have this practice right now? I'm sure there are. And I feel like I've heard of this.
I don't know them.
I feel like I have heard. So I don't
I've heard
know.
a ton anecdotally, nothing that I've ever gone deep and looked into.
Yeah.
So it's
but I feel like I have. I just can't speak to it because I do feel like I have heard some sort of structure where, and it's more in a tribal. But again, I can't really speak to it. But I think that it does exist. So. Of course, if our brains can conjure it up, it probably exists. So, I love
and that's
that.
the other thing, that sometimes people are looking in the past for models, and maybe you have them, maybe you don't. It's good to kind of see what's out there, what did and did not work in different society, but ultimately we're also talking about something new because the context we're talking about is new. So it's like, whether it happened or didn't, that's why, for example, we mentioned Chris Ryan earlier. Some of the stuff he says, some people say, oh, that never happened, that's your idealized version of how the past was, blah, blah, blah. Now, regardless of that debate, whether he's right or wrong, who cares?
Yeah.
The point is more, how does that, whether it's a practice, a reality, or an idea, can you do it now? Because that's a whole separate question. And is it desirable now? Well, if it is, who cares whether it really happened in the past or not? Try it.
We're here now.
Exactly.
You know?
So to me, it's like stuff like that is, I don't know, it's worth entertaining as a concept. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm on the sex. Okay, the one thing that's coming to me that I hear from a lot of folks who have a hard time with, say there was, a man who wanted to be intimate with someone, but they're not choosing sex work because they say they need connection. So I have a 2-part question for you. 1, have you ever slept with a sex worker or been intimate with one? And 2, what do you think about that piece? That if there's a money exchange, then that hurts connection because someone is always putting on a show to get something out of you.
Yeah, money changes the dynamics, of course. But to me, it's like this idea that there has to be some kind of connection all the time. I think it's like, first, I'll tell you a crazy story. Like, first time I had an encounter with a sex worker, right? This was hilarious because the first... what happened in that contest was so funny because I was intrigued with the idea, exactly what we're talking about, the idea of separating sex from relationships, where it doesn't, and I always felt weird about kind of like the one night stand thing for the reason that I always feel that what people say and what people actually feel are two different things. So sometimes I can tell you, I'm totally comfortable with these things, but in reality there are 10 different strings attached that are non-verbally said, and I'm like, there's drama, And I think growing up, that actually is interesting. I just thought of it now. I never thought of it before. Growing up in Italy, in a context where guys tended to be pretty aggressive about stuff, I wanted to make sure I was the exact opposite. I never wanted to make somebody feel weird. I never wanted to walk away from whether a sexual or any other kind of relationship with me feeling hurt or feeling taken advantage of or stuff. So I was... to the 10th power trying to be the opposite, right?
Be the nice guy?
So if I feel even remotely the fact that there may be something other than, we are just having a pleasant one-night stand, that's it, I'm like, I'd rather not. I'd rather not go there. I don't want to... So to me, I always had more hesitance about that kind of stuff. And so I felt if the idea was, experience sex without all the attachment, I was... more interested in sex work at that point rather than some random hookup, just because at least in sex work it's very clear what you're there for. It's very clear what the exchange is. There are no games, no weird emotional bullshit. Nobody's gonna walk away feeling hurt. Again, as long as you're nice to each other, that's good. It's like getting a massage. You know, it's like, it's very clear where it begins and where it ends. So, but still, you know, when the first time that I started approaching the topic, I started researching, I started prior to more recent laws that wiped out all the websites. There were all sorts of things about where you can go online. And LA, it's the place for that.
Of course, it's very accessible.
But of course, the first time I was about to meet this lady, there's one part of me just flipped out, right? I was just like, oh shit.
What am I doing?
What am I doing? What is this thing? I was just feeling like, you know, just muscle stance, everything like feeling really weird, right? Because again, you don't normally hear a whole lot of positive sex work stories. They tend to be sordid, ugly, nasty thing. That kind of is the image you get a lot. And met this lady, ridiculously nice. And I mean, it's clear what you're there. You know, it's clear that it's there. It's a money exchange. It's money for sex exchange. It's where it's at, right? There's no... But the fact that it could be so pleasant, that it didn't have to be just gross, like, okay, put down the money, let's go, get on with it, get out. It was actually a pleasant human interaction where you're just... You're creating a 1 hour connection, a 2 hour connection, whatever. It's like... But it doesn't have to be weird, you know? And actually, this is where it got weird. It's like, by the time everything was said and done, you're, you know, chatting afterwards and stuff, and she was asking me things about my life. And it was a time where my life was not going well, to put it mildly, right? There was drama in every possible direction, and which I think it was part of why I went for it at the time, because I had less to lose. I was more in a mindset where I'm like,
fuck it.
Exactly. You know,
let's do it.
It's like, whatever. What's the worst that can happen? It's like everything bad that can happen pretty much happened already. So it's like, okay, let's... And so she asked me, and I'm like, I don't know, you really want to know? And I'm like, okay, fine. And so I started telling her a couple of things. And by the time she was like, you know what? Don't pay me. It's you need it more than I do.
Oh, really?
And I'm just like, no, really, come on. It's, let's be real about it. That's bullshit. And so we have this argument, you know,
her trying to have me so you didn't pay her? What?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
You have, you know, the image that you have of the sex work is that it's all about the money, and that's, if any argument is there, is the customer trying to bring down the price, the sex worker being like, hey, are you kidding me? That kind of thing.
Pay me up front. Mm-hmm.
And we're having the exact opposite argument, where each one is like, no, but come on. It's like, no, you're nice, you deserve it. No, you are not. It's like, I was like, oh, come on, this is the coolest thing ever, right? It was like, it really, in a weird way, sort of, at a time that was really dark for me, sort of restore a feeling of goodness of life. Because it's like in a context where if you ask 99% of people, they tell it's an ugly, nasty, weird bad. I find in that context something ridiculously sweet and pleasant interaction. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And then it makes it so much easier than the other aspect of it, the sex part, is like the fact that you can just separate. Like you can be really cool, really nice, good people, and yet it's not about a love story or anything that's going to last. You meet each other that day. You're never going to see each other again, probably. And that's okay. Yeah. And you can be cool, and you can be cool with what you have in that hour physically. You can be cool on an emotional level. I was like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
You know, now, I'm not expecting all scenarios to be like that. I'm sure there are all sorts of other scenarios that are less pleasant. But that, to me, was just... I remember it as a really formative moment for who I am as a person, you know, in terms of how it made me feel about everything, you know. And in an odd kind of way, that kind of experience relaxed me tremendously.
It was healing.
Completely healing, right? And I relaxed me tremendously around also women in general. Because inevitably, the thing that happens all the time is if you're attracted to somebody, you want to put on a certain face of like, I'm likable. You should like me, really. And so it's like, and then you start playing games because you're not really who you are. You want something. You want them to like you. Maybe you want to have sex with them, something, right? So you're not really being honest with who you are because you want something from them.
Yeah, put it on the show. Yeah.
And you know, it doesn't mean you're sneaky or weird, but you do want something. You come from a place of need. That's where it's at. And instead, being in a scenario where it's like, okay, you know, if it's just about that, you can pick up the phone and go have sex with some really hot person that you're attracted to it now. So I don't need that from you. You know, it doesn't come from, if we're choosing to have an interaction here, it's not because I'm trying to get something. If it clicks, it clicks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't need to. And I think that itself changed completely my attitude I never thought that I was acting that way, but then in hindsight, it's like, yeah, you kind of were, you know, of course, you know, if you're attracted and you come from that place, you come from a place of need. That's how it is. It's gonna, even if consciously you're not doing it, you're still doing it, you know. And when that changed in my life, that made my interactions with women in general very different.
Yeah.
And in a weird kind of way, I noticed that women started liking me considerably more because I wasn't coming from a place of need. You know, because I was like, look, I'm not trying to get anything out of you. I'm enjoying this.
Well, they feel safer in
exactly.
that. Yeah.
And so it's like it's completely, the whole approach is more relaxed. It's not that result driven. It's more like,
yeah. We take the pressure off the table. It's totally changes things. I just had, I would call it sex work. So I just paid for a session with someone who is a body worker, but they will also do G-spot massage or like sacred spot healing. So internal work or work on the vulva. And I didn't do that piece, but I was wanting to create more sexual aliveness. So it was like, let's take the vulva off the table, but everything else is fair game. And
why?
The vulva?
Yeah.
Specific request from my partner.
Okay.
So my partner was just like, my partner said that if I felt like if a second time around that I wanted to put the vulva on the table, then we could talk about it. So it wasn't completely off. It was just for the first time to really feel into it. And it was also psilocybin enhanced. So I took a gram of mushrooms, and which was amazing, by the way, to have this experience where the mushrooms really just heighten everything, all the sensations. This person is a world-class body worker, but it's done in this very shamanic way where they're listening, just literally following a thread. And, you know, 1 minute my legs are in these crazy contorted positions where and they're, you know, deep in my inner thighs. And next minute there's a singing bowl on my womb, and he's, you know, right over my lower belly, and he's playing it, and it feels like there's little fingers inside of my pussy moving around. It's amazing. And so it had this very erotic theme. I paid for it. It was phenomenal. I left there so alive. I was like, and there was no pressure.
Yeah.
It was so relieving. Like, with my partner, as much as he were to show up and say, you know what, you can just relax. This is all about you. There still is this little voice to me like, but you need to be giving.
Of course.
But in this, because I paid for this, it really allowed that to just be, that's not even an option, right? So I was like, oh my God, this is like the ultimate surrender. And it was so... And it was healing in a lot of ways because I was able to just fully be there for everything. It was incredible. And I know that a lot of people don't have access to these kind of folks, but if you can experience this, and I think, but that's the beauty of sex work, is that the pressure is gone and all of a sudden you can receive. And that's not always on the table, even when there's a conversation with a partner. You know, even when your partner's like, "This is all about you, honey. Don't worry."
Yeah,
it's like still little voice. Or if tonight I'm not going to be one given to you, then tomorrow I need to give to you. And that little voice, and just so freeing to get rid of that.
Totally, and I agree with you 100% on that, because that's exactly that feeling. It's like, I don't care. You can have the best relationship in the world, the best sex in the world. The fact that remains, there's a dynamic there where you exist in this relationship past this moment. It's not just about this moment right here, right now. So there are all sorts of things, you know, you want to care about your partner, you want to make sure they're okay, you're thinking about them, you're doing this and that and that. That obviously is a completely different experience from one where it's like you're there for one reason and one reason only. There's a very clear beginning and end. That's it.
Yeah.
And so it's more about, and that really changes. You really, in some way, to me, makes you more able to experience that kind of pleasure for yourself without constantly be thinking about, what do I need to do? What do I... As long as you're cool, as long as you're not an asshole to the person involved, then you're good. Then anything that's going to happen from then on is good.
And it could help with the insecurities, too, of what do they think about me? Do they like me? Do they love me? Like, well,
it's not about that.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's not even on the table.
Exactly. It's like, the bar is set really low. It's just, don't be a complete asshole.
Yeah.
As long as you manage to do that, you're good. Whatever happens after that is fine.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, okay, takes a lot of pressure off. That relaxes you. And to me, it's like, And again, it may, for some people it's going to work, some people not. I've heard people who, for example, experience the same thing. They're like, it's fun and all, but I know that they are there only for the money, and so I don't feel,
It doesn't feel good.
And I'm just like, I think, was it a Game of Thrones line? I can't remember where I heard it. It was a great line where it's like one character telling another was saying, you know, they only like you for your money. And the other one replied, well, good thing I have money.
Yeah.
Because
Great. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but so what? I don't know. To me, it's like, I understand it logically where they are coming from. Doesn't make sense to me. Because I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not, I don't know, maybe because I don't have an issue. Okay, I think that's what it is. It's probably because I don't have an issue with the idea of being liked by somebody in general, right? So I'm like, I know.
You don't like me, it's fine. Yeah.
And also I know that some people will like me, so I'm okay with that. I'm good. I don't feel that. Maybe if you feel that if your whole experience you don't have an easy time having people like you, maybe that's more what it's, probably it's not even about sex at that point, probably it's more about having somebody who like you for who you are, and then definitely you're not going to get it from a sex work session, you know, that's not going to be it.
Yeah.
So that may be what the issue is, that somebody's there for very different reason, and they are not going to get it from that experience.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah.
Yeah, I dig your stories. Like 1 gram of
it was
mushrooms.
awesome. Oh my God.
And you did it right, right? 1 gram is enough to get you in a weird space, but not really weird.
Wasn't too
you're
much.
Comfortable. And
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I mean, the intention is to stay in the body, but have the body be super activated. And it was a journey, and I will definitely be going back. It was just like, and I after that, I was like, I just want to be naked in nature.
Right.
And it's, I mean, my ultimate feminine pouring out of me, like out of every orifice of my body. It was like, and I also felt like, well, I don't think there was like a lot of, you know, juices flowing out of me. I felt this like internal juiciness. It was just, it was amazing. And not to mention that this man that's doing it is beautiful. So that was awesome.
That tend to help.
But, but I still had no desire to touch them.
Sure.
It was just like, no. And part of that was just like, oh no, this is about me. You know, this is, and I'm going to relish in that because how often do I get to do this? And it was 3 hours. It's just like,
3 hours?
Yeah, 3
Jesus
hours.
Christ.
Incredible.
That's intense.
It was so good.
3 hours.
Yeah.
Jesus. That's wild.
It was, I left and my hair was just like the ultimate sex hair without having sex. It was, I went home, my partner's like, wow. Looking at me like, well, that looked like, I mean, just looking at you, it looked like you had a great time. Like, I did. It's amazing.
And it was cool. There was no weirdness there with him.
No.
Like you guys were like, he was like, okay.
Yeah, he was definitely supportive. And I think if we put the vulva on the table, then it would have been, there would have been needed more discussion. He's very supportive because my journey is to tap more into my sexual aliveness. Because I have a tendency to be a much more heady person, and so just, the more I can get into my body, especially into like my pelvic floor, the better. And so, of course, he's all on board for that because when I do that work, then I show up more connected and alive with him. So it serves everyone. So yeah, it's great. This is the first partner I've had because I do all these things in the realm of sexuality. First one I've had that. I mean, his work is a little out there too. I won't out it on the air, but it's a little out there. So, and he's the first partner is really supportive and not threatened by me talking about sex, by me going and using my body as this research project to discover things. Of and of course, it's all works within our boundaries, you know, whatever that is. But it's wonderful to have that support.
Yeah, because I mean, that's not easy.
No, of course.
Most people
they get threatened.
Yeah, forget it. Yeah, exactly. You go back to the insecurities.
Yeah.
If anybody has like 1% insecurity is gonna blow up in that scenario. It's like that means you don't like me.
Yeah.
That means,
what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
I'm not enough.
Of course.
If you want to go have this other person touch your body for 3 hours, it must be that I'm not doing it enough. And you know, maybe there is a little bit of truth of like, yeah, of course I want more of this, but it doesn't mean you're not doing it enough. It just means I want as much as I can get.
Well, and also the thing is, one person is one person. They can be the most amazing person in the world, but you know, if you are even physically, if you have a certain body type, that means you don't have another body type. Now, your body type may even be more attractive to me than the other one, but it's variety, right?
Yeah.
It's like you like more than one thing.
Totally.
So it's like it's not necessarily a feeling on anybody else's part.
Yeah.
It's just that you like more than one thing.
Yeah.
That's just where it's at.
Yeah, it's like diversify the experiences.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about blowjobs specifically because, okay.
Do tell.
I mean, I teach blowjob classes too. I'm like, why are we calling it a blowjob?
That's
It's very
an
confusing for a young
interesting,
person.
That's an interesting title to put on your business card.
Yeah, I'm a blowjob teacher.
Right.
And but then think of young people and they're like, blowjob, so you blow, right? Blowing on it. Very confusing.
Oh, that's painful.
But and I was trying to figure out, where does it come from? There's like fellatio and the Latin term and all of that, but the actual blowjob. And so this is what I found, and I think I found on like Google, so I don't even know if this is true, but it kind of made sense to me, and maybe obviously get your feedback on this.
I have no idea. I already have no idea, so it's going to be fun. Yeah, I've got to go for it.
So what I read was that it's actually about the blow job is actually paying to blow your load. So it's a job for like sex work. Okay. And it's about the ejaculation. That's blowing. Okay, so it's blowing your load, and it's a job because you go and pay for it. So it became a blow job. And so, coming from, years ago from sex work, that someone would go pay to have this done. And then it was called a blowjob. This is what I read. I have no evidence. I have no research studies about. I have nothing for you except that I read that, and it's the only theory that I've heard make sense because I don't know anyone that's just blowing. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm sold. That makes.
You like it? Okay, good. All right, just wanted to make sure.
I never heard of the origin of the term, so that's why I was like, I have no clue. But that's a very. If it's not real, it's extremely well crafted.
It's like, well, that works for me. I'm going to go with it.
Checks all the boxes, right? Yeah. That's one thing that is funny too when you think about. There's a chapter in a book by we had him on the podcast, I think once or twice. Thaddeus Russell. He did this book called The Renegade History of the United States, and all the chapters are about, like, his whole thesis about how kind of like moral renegades are the people who sort of push the ball forward, that a lot of the things that we enjoy today have been started by people who are very much outside of the edge of normal society. So there's one chapter which I think is, personally, I find the best chapter of the book is about sex work, right? And he's talking about the quote that he opens the chapter with says, in the 19th century, a woman who owned property, made high wages, had sex outside of marriage, performed or received oral sex, used birth control, consorted with men of other races, danced, drank, or walked alone in public, wore makeup, perfume, or stylish clothes, and was not ashamed, was probably a whore. In fact, prostitutes won virtually all the freedoms that were denied to women, but are now taken for granted. That right there, I mean, I think that was like his best work right there, right? That right there, that initial passage is like, whoa, yeah. Okay, let's read the rest.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think it was an article, I was looking for the quote right now, it's slightly different, but basically he framed, there was another quote of his very similar to this, where it goes like in a series of sort of a similar list in terms of freedoms that people enjoy today. And he says, okay, if you enjoy this, and this, you can thank a sex worker, because that's how it all started.
Oh, because it came from that,
Right. And so specifically when it comes to oral sex, he was saying now that was basically primarily a sex work thing. That's how...
Not shared between married partners or
absolutely. Then there was, forget, especially when you're talking about late 1800s, where it's like a Victorian era and there's degree of prudishness is on the rise dramatically. There's actually, I go into in some of, that's the thing that I have fun with in my history classes, where I do try to bring sex into the game to make it more, people always wake up for that part of the lecture, right? Of course, it's like, so one thing that I bring up is that around that period of time, because of the culture going in a very Puritan direction, what typically happened was that men, women would really be raised with so much bullshit baggage passed on to them from when they were kids, that it was that they were understandably freaked out by sex. They were told that there was no discussion of sex. If there was a discussion, it was always in a negative term, was always seen, the only reason why you do it is to have cute babies, close your eyes, it will be over soon, and then you can enjoy the cute babies. This is not for you. Definitely not. Anybody who enjoy it, you're a horrible and terrible person. Definitely good girls don't enjoy that kind of stuff, right? So most women would grow up pretty freaked out about sex, right? And it would be primarily, okay, have sex, have the babies, be done, right? Most men who kind of sometimes got the same message, but there was also more of a boys will be boys attitude, so there was much more tolerance for stepping outside those rules for men than there was for women. Most men would have sex with their wives for having cute babies, but for good sex, they would go to sex workers. And that's kind of how the whole thing was. So things like oral, totally, that was a sex worker thing. There was not regular behavior that people would go for.
Yeah.
Or at least, I mean, it's always hard to tell because what people do
Actually
and what people
reported,
report
yeah.
are two very different things. So who knows what really happened? But based on the evidence, it looks like it was definitely much more of a sex work thing than a regular behavior thing.
Yeah.
Because there was so much stigma. So especially non-procreative sexuality, big taboo at that point.
Oh yeah, you can't make babies out of that. You're not supposed to do that.
Exactly, precisely. So there, I think, was the mentality, which is again funny when you think today that things that were very taboo and only allowed within the context of sex work. Not a million
Not
years
very long ago,
like
yeah.
100 years ago, 150 years ago, somewhere in that ballpark.
Is now like a
Today
normal
are
foreplay or
it's
regular
like
practice.
completely normal, and it's like,
Yeah.
and I think that's why his stuff came to mind, because it's like, yeah, if you enjoy that,
Yeah.
thank a sex worker.
Yeah,
'cause
thanks,
that's
sex
our,
worker.
exactly.
All right.
That's our.
Yeah, people got to get their dick sucked, So.
And I'm like, but if you think about it, yeah, something like that, right? Very, you think about the physical event. It's pretty straightforward. It is what it is. There's nothing particularly weird about it. But yet the culture, how the culture can change really quickly. How
Yeah.
today, again, pretty normal. I mean, again, there's lots of people have weird hang-ups about sex in general, but still, as far as sexual behavior goes, yeah, pretty normative. You have it just not that long ago. Would have been monstrously scandalous, right? Would have been something that's like, no way in hell a good woman does that.
Yeah.
That's what the sex. It's like, man, that tells you something about the power of culture to shape individuals. The fact that, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, you don't have to go far. 150 years ago, 200 years ago, being against slavery would have been weird, right?
Yeah.
You'd have been like, what?
Yeah.
You're against? You don't want to have slaves? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
What's the... And today, I mean, unless you are like the 0.01% of some freak out there, nobody would say, yes, slavery is cool. It's like, it's
Yeah.
pretty accepted that... So to me, it's always... I guess it's not a very good view of human nature in there, but the way I see it is that most people are like trained donkeys. They see the carrot in front and they go with it. If the social consensus is that a certain thing is good,
Yeah, they do.
the majority
Yeah.
of people follow. If it's bad, they follow. You need a critical mass to make the switch for it to suddenly become a normal thing.
Yeah.
But that initial process for the critical mass to hit, you're gonna run into so
Oh,
much
yeah.
resistance before you can get there. And again, think like something like oral sex. Pretty damn basic, right? Pretty damn like no opposition. Suddenly
maybe,
you pass a
yeah.
certain threshold and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, normal society accept it.
Yeah.
It's all cool. And it's like,
Yeah, it's so curious about how that happened. Like who was just starting to bring it on the table and be like,
Right.
you know what, this thing actually feels good. It's kind of cool. Let's start
Right.
doing it. We can't get pregnant from it, and to have it just become a norm.
Right.
Yeah. That it reminds me also of the word job. In blowjob or hand job or. A lot of those things, and whether it comes from sex work or not, it still is implied,
Yeah.
and that's another thing that's haunting people especially in long-term relationships. Like, it's a job, I don't want to do it. It's work, and even the title that we don't really even question it. We just
Yeah.
use it and don't really think about where did it come from and what does it imply. And even if we don't think of it as a job, it just often is. It's this thing of like, I have to go outside of myself and give to someone. And I'm like, you're giving pleasure though, and to me it feels like a very selfish to go through. Of course you get to choose, right? You're getting a big no, you don't have to go suck a dick, right? But it's selfish to just say that you don't like it because it feels like a job. Now, if it feels like a job because someone's pressuring you, or maybe they're pushing your head down, or whatever
that's
that is,
different,
like it's different. Like you're saying,
but you have bigger problems than the sex act. It's
of
like
course,
that
there's other
relationship
things.
Sucks in a
there's
bad way.
major disrespect.
Right.
There's some things to do there, and if it really is just the act of giving feels like a job, there's so much work that you can do around that, and also starting to question, where does this come from? Where's this idea come from? And here you go. So from the book, thank a sex worker. So,
Totally, but
yeah.
I think in what you're saying that's really interesting is if the idea of giving pleasure to somebody feels like work, there's something seriously wrong in that relationship. Not in the sexuality, in the relationship in itself.
Yes.
It's like, why wouldn't you want to
Yeah.
make the person that you care for, that you love,
Feel good. Yeah.
Totally. It's like, are you crazy? Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, what is this relationship based on?
Yeah, and it's like, and it clearly means there's something seriously wrong in the relationship to begin with, where, again, it's not even about sex at that point. I would question 3 steps back at the origin of that whole thing of why you feel that way, because something is off there. You know? But yeah, the idea that that's a job, I think you nailed it perfectly. There is a connection there between the two things. The idea that it was probably just a sex work thing that then translate, because you don't have the same term for just quote unquote the regular sex or just vaginal sex. It's like that's,
penetration job.
There's no job part of that, and so the fact that those would be by the way, that's an English thing, because I like. There's a bunch of languages around the world, from what I heard from people, that like I'm kind of vaguely remember it, so don't quote me on it, but I do remember people from several different places where they were like, there's no, that term in English doesn't really translate at all in some other languages.
Blowjob doesn't.
Exactly.
But would there be like some sort of fellation or oral or something? Not really.
Yeah, exactly. It varies, of course, from place to place. But it was more something like that. Yeah, that's a very English thing.
Yeah.
It's not something that I've heard elsewhere. So it's... Oh, that's, by the way, homework number 2 for your listeners. Is like, so we got your masturbation fantasies to enhance the cumulative consciousness about fantasies. The other one is come up with a better name for blowjob. Blowjob is terrible.
It's terrible.
Let's look at it. It's just...
I can't get away from it. That when I teach those classes, I always start with why blowjobs are awesome, where I heard the term came from, why it's not, doesn't have to be perceived as a job. And yet I don't have a practice of using other terms. They haven't stuck for me yet. So I still say it, but I'm like, ugh, it's just so awkward.
Sometimes, I mean, some of them are just funny. And as long as, because I mean, of course, when you come up with a new term for something that people use, you sound weird and pretentious. It's kind of like calling your kid some weird, crazy name that is like, it's cute and poetic, but it's so weird that it's bizarre. So to me, it's like, I have nothing for blowjob, but like for sex workers, which, since it's not like sex workers feel weird, right? It's like, it's very bureaucratic almost. All the other terms like hookers or stuff, they have a weird connotation to it. So I read somewhere this thing, I think it was an ancient Chinese thing, it was probably somebody writing a wild poem, and it made me laugh, and I used it ever since, referring to sex workers as goddesses of mercy.
And I was like, that. That's awesome.
Goddesses of mercy. That's so of course, you're using it tongue in cheek because it's so goofy sounding, but at the same time, it's like, I dig it. It's more in line with how I feel than compared to a sex worker or hooker or something. I was like, goddess of mercy, I dig that.
Well, and that goes hand in hand with the ideas about like the ancient tantrikas and how they were revered as sexual healers. There was this position that was looked up to. They were, goddesses of mercy because they were there, very skilled, could show up and sexually heal people. And that's and there are modern day versions of. There's plenty of them. I mean, I know sex workers who are like, I'm a healer, and I know sex workers who are just doing it for money and are just doing it or they just enjoy, or they're pro-doms or whatever that is, and even that can be very healing. So there's so many components to it, and yet because of what we're taught in the laws and all this stuff, it's just like it's not revered. It really by the general culture.
And I think it's why it's hard sometimes to generalize, because of course when you talk about sex work, there is going to be a lot of like the ugly stuff that people thought
human trafficking and
it's real. It exists for sure, right? And there's a ton of nasty stuff in that department. There are a lot of experiences, so there's nothing cool about it. It's messed up, it's straight up evil, human trafficking, sexual slavery, stuff that's like, beyond horrible, right? And that's real. At the same time, what we are talking about is also real. And so it's like, it's almost weird that we have the same terminology for the same thing. Because you are... I think sometimes you can have... Like, I was listening to this guy was on some podcast, and he was like a vice cop cracking down on sex work and all of that. Now, he had a pretty good attitude about it, in the sense that he was clearly... The way he viewed himself, he clearly saw as somebody who was trying to help people and rescue them from bad situation, putting the ball in their court, not throwing them in jail, just kind of like putting the pressure on. But his vibe was, his whole experience was only, the dark, ugly side of sex work. Was it's all human trafficking.
Yeah, all the
it's
bad
all
stuff.
people who have been thrown into it through abuse, through things, through that.
They're not choosing it.
And I'm trying to get them out. And I'm like, I get where it's coming from, and I completely respect the feeling. I disagree on the idea that that's all there is out there. Because again, that's from personal experience. I've seen a whole other side of it that's not that. But I think that's the problem, that we end up using the same terms to talk about experiences that have nothing to do with one another.
Yeah, they're very different.
Completely.
Just throw it all in one category.
Yeah, it's like human trafficking is human trafficking.
Yeah.
What you are describing as the healer sex work is like 180 degrees from that, right? They are not even... And I think it's part of the problem with language and... like recently when they passed that law that like
all the Craigslist and all
right
that,
officially looks good, right? Because it's like, oh, you're cracking down on sex trafficking through websites that promote sex trafficking will be shut down, they can be persecuted, all of that. Who will be against that? That makes sense. The problem is that because the website owner would have to check on every single posting that's out there, which they can't do. So then they shut down the whole thing. So what they are shutting down is for every sex trafficking thing that doesn't go on that website, there's probably another 50 listings that are completely consensual adults. There's no weirdness. They get to shut down too, because it all goes under the same umbrella. And that's the problem. Exactly. And that is like, I completely agree with cracking down on one thing. I completely disagree on putting
them in the same category.
Exactly. They're not the same thing.
The same kind of concept of like, okay, cars, right? They kill people. And we're not getting rid of putting them in the same category as like all cars are bad because we need to get rid of them because they kill people or hurt people. And so sex work. Oh, there's certain aspects of like bad things happen. So let's get rid of it altogether. It just is not the answer. It's not helpful, and it's always going to happen. They're always going to find a way. People go underground, and unfortunately, what happens is usually they have to go find ways where it's less safe for them. I mean, a lot of my sex worker friends we actually have done podcasts on this where they are really, and also actually the people that do the work around sex trafficking are saying that because it's not online, they can't find the people that are human trafficked, right? They can't. That was their way to find the young girls and boys that were being trafficked. And so now the people I know that are sex workers and doing it because they love it, they're like, what, I have to go like stand on the corner now? And
basically.
It's and that's not safe because when I was online I could screen and I could and there used to be sites where they had screening sites for this, and now it's just, and there still are things out there, but this general idea of like if there's a certain component of something, we're putting it all in the same category. There's a certain component that's not good or doesn't work, let's just get rid of all of it. And it's just
it doesn't make sense. It's that approach of like, oh, fire can burn, so we should outlaw fire. It's like, no, you have a good point to start, and you completely miss the point of where you take it. It's like, no, that's not the solution at all. It's like, fire can burn. Yes, there are things that are dangerous. Yes, there are things that need to be addressed. No, the solution is not a blanket prohibition. Even because, I mean, we know it from how many examples by now, from prohibition on alcohol, drug war, everything.
Oh, they're still doing it.
Prohibition doesn't work. You know, and the argument is not just saying, oh, these things are, everybody should do crystal meth is great for you. Nobody's saying that, right? It's like there are drugs that are bad for you, flat out bad.
Totally.
But prohibition doesn't make it better. You don't reduce the rate of addiction. You don't reduce the rate of consumption. You just create a black market. So it's like, it's just an approach that doesn't work about anything. Why in the world would you apply to human sexuality in that way? It's like legalize consenting adult sex work, and then you have all the resources to crack down on the real shady, ugly human trafficking stuff.
It'll give you more access.
Exactly.
It's so backwards. It's baffling.
But I think it goes back to the same thing. I think it's like there's this heritage of shame
that keeps on going, passed down.
I mean, it's different from the way it was in the past, and I appreciate that. It's better than it was in US 150 years ago. I appreciate that. But it's very far from where in an ideal world we would be. It's very far from. I mean, I read stuff even among not just, some hardcore evangelical thing, but like people who are taken seriously as, public intellectuals, things like that. Some of their comments about sexuality are just like, Jesus Christ, you got some problems.
Yeah.
Man. It's like, lighten up a little. It's not that bad.
I hear that stuff and I just instantly like, what's your issues? What's your mommy wounding? What's your daddy wounding?
Totally.
Like, what's the stuff that you never worked on and that you're projecting into the rest of the world instead of doing your own work?
Yeah.
I mean, when is that not the case when that's coming there? There's something there that has some need or some hurt or trauma that hasn't been met,
Yep.
or maybe a lot of it. And instead of recognizing that and owning that and doing the personal work, they're putting it out there to change and affect everyone else because they think that the subconscious somehow thinks that will help them in turn. Is just not the answer.
Yeah, completely. There's one that I usually close a class that I do on. There's one that I try to throw in everything just because it's fun and it gets people going. But I do a class sometime in U.S. history, sometime history of religions about the evolution of ideals about sex in Christianity. Mm-hmm. And it gets pretty funny at moments. Yeah. And toward the end, one thing that I jump into is how it affects modern culture. Mm-hmm. And one thing I zero in is the word slut. Right?
Slut. Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, bear with me. I'm a phobe with a tentative knowledge of the English language, so I'm a little confused by this term. Help me out here. I'm like, so how do you define that? If it's somebody who's kind of indiscriminately giving sex left and right, so what you're saying is you're describing a philanthropist, right? A good humanitarian who's, it's kind of like Mother Teresa of sex. It's just like spreading love. It's like, that's a good thing, right? And it's like, and of course everybody crack out because it's so weird sounding, but at the same time, I think about it. It's like, how did that become a bad term? Like, what do you even mean? Like, to me, it's like, I don't even need to know to the context of how you're using it. Just the fact that somebody is describing with a negative connotation, use the word slut. I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm out of this conversation.
Yeah, this is not,
That's just, our worldviews come from such different places that I just can't relate.
There's no room for that. Oh yeah. I'm the same. Yeah, I love that. I always say that like sluts are the best lovers because they're highly experienced and probably know a lot more about what their body likes and there's less of this like, oh, I don't know, this is awkward, I'm confused. And then there's that part too in like the reverence of it, of like they're giving a lot of pleasure. That's awesome. Pleasure helps the world.
Yeah,
you think of the people that are angry and you're having a really hard time in life. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of them are not receiving a lot of pleasure.
I completely agree.
And if they did, they would probably feel a little different and treat people a little differently. And maybe they still have some old work to do. It's not just around pleasure. And if the whole world was a little more slutty, then maybe the world would be a little more peaceful and loving.
I was doing they asked me to do a commercial for History of Fire for like a chewable Viagra. And I was like, I'm going to have fun with that. So I went exactly the route where you're going with it. I was like, think about how many wars, how much bloodshed has taken place throughout history. How much of that would have happened had people been a little more satisfied in other areas of their life? Go back in time, pump with chewable Viagra, a bunch of the angry dictators of the world would have been that angry, or they'd be like, let's go slaughter 100,000 people. I don't feel it today. I would rather hang out.
I'm good. I just got laid this morning, so I'm fine. Chewable Viagra, ending the world wars.
It's,
I'm sold.
That's a good place to call. Anything, since we're doing a mutual release, we should mention where
people find us,
exactly.
what we do.
So please go ahead for yours.
So yes, for myself, I don't do a lot of things, but I have a podcast that some of you are listening to now and some of you are not because you're on a different podcast called Shameless Sex, and I co-host it with my dearest best friend, April. As I said before, she is stuck in a masturbation sleep booth as we speak. April, we love you.
Oh, the booth.
The booth, She's
like,
inside of the sleep.
That
it's vibrating
weird.
around her. It's very pleasurable. So you can find Shameless. You can go to shamelesssex.com, and we're also on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube. Just look up Shameless Sex, and you can subscribe there. And we're also on Instagram. You can find Shameless Sex there as well. I also have an adult store called Pure Pleasure Shop. So you go to Pure Pleasure. You can go to purepleasureshop.com. And for our listeners, you know that you get 15% off if you use coupon code ShamelessPP in all caps. And I believe those are my best ways to find me. What about you?
Sweet. So I host two podcasts. One, The Drunken Taoist, where we're doing this mutual release of like on both feeds. So Drunken Taoist is more for those of you who are listening on the shameless sex side. Drunken Taoist is, we do 2 episodes a month typically. One is an interview with discussion, kind of what we're having now. Another one is just me and my co-host Rich Evers chatting about life, the universe, and everything. Doesn't have a single theme. It's kind of like whatever we're in the mood for. So we life at 360 degrees. The other one that I run is History on Fire, and that just me narrating some history in epic fashion. I'll zero in on one topic and usually run either 1 or 2 or 3 episodes of a series and just get to all the juicy detail, try to make it epic so that you're at the edge of your seat, and that's History on Fire. Both of them, I mean, again, sometimes when we do these things at the end of podcasts, like, where people can find you? It's like, yeah, there's Google. It's pretty easy.
Just Google me and I'm
exactly.
there, yeah.
It's like there's, so that all the other stuff is easily found that way.
And you're an author too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote a few books. I wrote 4 books.
Okay.
So yeah, those are, again, it's
just
like,
Google me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The gods of Google will be good to you.
Yeah. I love the way you say drunken.
Sorry.
Your partner was saying, because April on our podcast, she we have this thing where if people make a request, when we ask them to do reviews on iTunes, they can request an accent. I don't even think she tried Italian yet. Some of them she nails, but and so people say, I like this in a German accent. She can always do German, but your partner was like, April should listen to this and then she can learn how to do an Italian accent. So, maybe this will inspire her.
After this episode, we want on the next episode, we want her going into a full Super Mario kind of
Super
version.
Mario.
Right.
That's it. Just go Super Mario, April.
By the way, I'm confused though. What accent? I have no
I
accent.
know. No, you're not at all. I don't either. I mean, isn't this what everyone sounds like?
Totally.
Don't forget to head on over to our website at shamelesssex.com for more. And for 15% off of some of our favorite sex toys, use coupon code SHAMELESSPP in all caps at purepleasureshop.com.